Hey everyone, I'm Laila Mourad, a PhD candidate at York University. It's a pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to be presenting research that I did as part of a fellowship in a policy think tank. And it's important to note that because it's very policy focused. Um, and I also want to make note that this work is intentionally not prescriptive. But think of it as visionary, if you will. Because I think that the road to innovative policies requires us to imagine alternative frameworks and models that are often invisibilized or marginalized by more prevalent systems of thought. And a lot of the speakers have already kind of referred to this. So if and usually I do this, I actually get people to sit and sketch out what a worker means to them. But we don't have time for this. But in general, you'll probably find that there isn't really actually one category of a worker. Or what work even means, especially in a global economy that's continuing to shift and transform with the rise in digitization, platform work, automation. And there are so many estimates out there. I found one that said there are around 1.1 billion workers worldwide, with projections that this would be increasing. But many of these workers are unseen, like informal or home-based gig workers, which is actually what my PhD project is about, but that's a whole other situation. And there are challenges in measuring data on gig work due to the non-traditional and informal relations, as many of you and previous sessions have talked about. But this limited access to data results in most of the current research on gig economies to also be focused on so-called developed countries or the global north, which means many economic trends and social issues in so-called developing countries or the global south remain unexplored. So today I kind of pose some questions for us to think about. If only the slide would move with my um yeah, I am pressing the arrows. Okay. Um so first of all, I just want to say I actually got ChatGPT to create this image for me out of curiosity. I asked ChatGPT to develop an image of a global divide in researching gig work. And this is what ChatGPT gave me. So anyways, we can talk about that later. But um, some questions to think about. In what ways does this global divide in research and governance of digital economies reinforce existing hierarchies in the global economy and amongst nations and communities? What are the existing mechanisms by which global governance institutions attempt to bridge this divide? And how can workers defined broadly and other stakeholders contribute to innovative and alternative policies that align and speak to their diverse needs within the emerging gig economy? So to explore these questions, I conducted a thematic analysis of major policy reports and working papers on gig work that were published in the last decade by specifically ILO and the World Bank. So some of the key gaps in existing policy frameworks highlight the need for, and those are the gaps that I think exist, broader definitions of workers and labor practices, workers' rights and protection and access barriers, inclusion of multiple factors that result in diverse experiences for gig workers, such as gender, race, class, and culture, and practical strategies to implement a multi-level stakeholder engagement model or collaboration in governance and management of gig economies. So building on this thematic analysis, I'm arguing that an alternative approach to researching issues related to gig work, gender, economic development, and technology at both the local and global level is possible and is necessary. So while the slide loads, oh, here it is. Today, I'm presenting, and academics love to create things, so here I am. I came up with the GEL model, or a gig economies living lab model. And living labs can be understood and defined as a methodology for applied research and a way to kind of prototype, experiment, and validate research in real-life settings. And the GEL model potentially offers an innovative space where researchers and policymakers can shift the narrative and bridge the global divide in governance and research on gig economies. So the purpose of the GEL would be to work towards integrating workers' voices, knowledges, and experiences, especially those who are marginalized within global governance frameworks and mainstream definitions of gig work. Would be to utilize an intersectional lens to account for gender, racial, material hierarchies amongst workers in various societies, and work towards bridging this global divide in research by decentering the global north and incorporating the knowledges, experiences, and realities of global south and marginalized communities within the global north. So in the following sections, I kind of go a bit in detail. So protection and access barriers and challenges were one of the most mentioned issues in the policy documents on gig work, and globally gig workers are suffering from risks of lower non-existent social legal protection, especially in the context of rising informality and lack of social insurance programs. A lot of you have already talked about this, and I'm sure you heard it a lot in the conference. But something that I found interesting was that in some areas, workers' centers are actively involved in protecting and bargaining on behalf of gig workers by exploring various online forums, tools for raising awareness, engaging unions, and organizing collective bargaining campaigns and actions. So it's a different type of, I guess, community activism. And so worker-centered solutions for protection and access barriers require a broader definition of workers and a more holistic understanding of their various needs and their diverse experiences that can't be universalized. And as mentioned in the previous section, workers are really different in the gig economy, and the challenges and barriers they face are impacted by various structural factors such as gender, race, class, culture. Major international institutions and private organizations and associations use a women's participation, gender mainstreaming, economic mainstream approach to researching, for example, gender and technology. But this approach provides a surface level conception of women's labor in the digital economy, since it doesn't really include a critical lens of the structural or the relational aspects of technology and labor, or how racial hierarchies, for example, are reinforced through these emerging relations and economies. So an intersectional feminist lens of analysis is important in understanding how gig work impacts women's everyday lives, especially under the current global economic system. The policy reports also highlighted the urgency for multilateral action, global solidarity. These words are honestly kind of triggering, but I'm just saying what the policy report said. Amongst multiple stakeholders and actors in researching, collecting data, experimenting, implementing innovative solutions, and policies to protect and support gig workers. Governments and international organizations are trying to work together to ensure domestic laws are applied to gig workers, and that legal provisions and fundamental rights are protected. So there is potential for transnational research that engages stakeholders at both local and global levels, and encourages, I guess, the experimentation of pilot projects and methods for social protection, regulation, data management, skills building. So on this basis, after going through the policy reports, I'm proposing the GEL model that speaks to the growing need for unconventional community-based initiatives to protect vulnerable workers using innovative and practical strategies. Building on this proposition, I used a case study approach of living labs in action to provide an overview and analysis of possibilities and mechanisms to envision, design, build, and actually operate a gel that upholds and reinforces a worker-centered, intersectional, transnational approach. And so the two cases that I chose were P-Will Platform Work Inclusion Living Lab, which is based in Europe, and Project Urban Living Lab, PUL, which is based in India. Both cases are multi-stakeholder networks that focus on economic and social issues and also use a human-centered research approach. So that's why I kind of chose them as case studies. And strategy and governance emerge as two key factors to consider when envisioning a living lab model. And by strategy, that means stakeholder engagement and relationship management, identifying shared values, and coming up with mutual goals and objectives. And when it comes to governance, it involves aspects such as funding, financial management, leadership and organizational structures, but also impact assessment and evaluation of research outputs. So ultimately, what's disruptive about the gel is not only its purpose, but the process of developing a strategy and a governance framework that doesn't marginalize or undermine gig workers in favor of tech companies or expert knowledge producers, or to reinforce global hierarchies between the global north and global south in terms of funding and in terms of leadership roles. So this is my final slide, I promise. The gel is not meant to be a one-size-fits-all model. So I'm just gonna throw some recommendations, but I still need to throw recommendations out there because of the nature of gig work being global, flexible, fluid. Stakeholders and those who would be involved need to be broad, right? So it needs to be worker-centered, but you need to kind of integrate all the different players that impact and have a role in the gig economy. And in terms of setting up the gel, again, in order not to reinforce power dynamics, it needs to be physically also located in multiple locations. And I had this idea of like a hub network where there are different types of decisions that get to be made based on different, I guess, again, contexts. And that would also impact how funding happens. So there is a need for diverse funding model because let's look at the global economy. I mean, everything is constantly reinforcing existing power hierarchies through money and through funding. I mean, the World Bank, ILO, all these institutions. And also for society like impact evaluation to be not just in terms of, I guess, numbers and figures, but also to kind of center the experiences and the impact that gig workers, I guess, are sharing and are telling. And so I know, again, like I said, it's a visionary exercise or I guess proposition. So I would be very interested to see what people think about it. Thank you.